Please welcome to the stage Joanna Diaz-Sofer, Principal Manager of Government and External Affairs at T-Mobile.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. My name is Joanna Diaz-Sofer. So great to be with you all here today. Our next panel is going to be talking about unlocking AI, although we've been talking a lot about AI because it's just integrated in everything that we do. AI at T-Mobile isn't a future promise. It's delivering on results today. And I will say personally, I was a little resistant to AI in the beginning. I'm fully on board now and I'm using it for all kinds of things at work. Figuring out data, going back and having it compilate, all kinds of stories for us. But even little things like I have AI every Sunday night. I have AI plan out my meals for my family, and it color codes it into a great, colorful chart for my toddlers. So anyway, it's just incredible what it can do. Last fall, T-Mobile and OpenAI announced a groundbreaking multi-year agreement that's revolutionizing our customer experience and resetting customer success benchmarks for companies around the world. Combining T-Mobile's deep expertise in cultivating customer relationships with OpenAI's cutting-edge AI technology and world-class research and development experts, these two companies are custom building the first intent-driven AI platform of its kind called Intent CX. Intent CX will have the ability to apply meaningful understanding and knowledge of the customer into every interaction and offer solutions to resolve issues that take proactive actions on their behalf. So hopefully, if you're a T-Mobile customer, you'll start seeing some of that integrated in our customer interface with you. T-Mobile leads the industry in deploying AI across its live network, enhancing performance, reliability, and customer experience. AI at T-Mobile translates directly to fewer dropped calls, seamless international roaming, prioritized emergency services, and intelligent automation, which benefits our customers' experience every day. We have combined technological advancements with tangible customer-facing services like dynamic network slicing, automated roaming support, and intelligent threat detection. And we're working with lots of great partners like NVIDIA, Nokia, and Ericsson, and we're already working on designing 6G as an AI native network. So lots of things to come in the future on that. These solutions are directly impacting our prospects, and it's so important that our community understands the technology and utilize it for our needs today and for our future. Antonio just said we are the solution to America's, America's workforce, and that couldn't be more real than it's never been more real than it is. Latinos are the future, and so obviously it's deeply important that we, understand this technology. Before I pass it to our moderator, I want to thank Judan and the HTTP team. I don't know where they are, but this has just been such a great, Judan's back there. It's been such a great, this whole model, Judan, of how you guys set this up and did this. It's just been really wonderful. So thank you for bringing us together for that. And the last panel did such a great job. Laura and everybody just did a really great job. So anyway, thank you guys for bringing us here for these truly impactful conversations. Now I will pass it to Lily Gangas, Chief Technology Community Officer at Core Center. Thank you.
So one, I'm just really excited to be here with you all as we're the closing panel. And I know you all have been hearing a lot of great insights and are also probably eager to get connected with each other for the rest of the day as well, but also continue to identify ways to collaborate. And I think for us being able to take on this next topic is we're going to solve all the world's problem in 30 minutes. So get ready for that. Just kidding. Really, what we want to create is provide an opportunity to have a conversation about intersecting topics, right? About, as we were hearing, some of the use cases about AI, but also what it takes to develop some of these systems, the role that privacy plays, the role that accessibility plays. How can those be more design features and very explicit in how some of the companies are working their strategies, as well as to ultimately, open source that's also accelerating the speed that a lot of the AI automated decision systems are really moving towards. But with that said, we have experts that will help us do all of that. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and welcome. So I hope you can give them a round of applause. We'll welcome Hoda Hawa from Public Sector and Stakeholder Engagement Senior Manager at Google. Give some love. We have Laurie Moylan, Public Policy Director, External Affairs at Meta. Excellent. Thank you so much. So as the topic for today, when we think about privacy, what are some of the things that you all think about? What are some key concerns? Raise your hand in the back. Feel free to shout it out. Data, your data, how some of these models are also using these types of data. Some of the choices are being tracked. And of course, some of the concerns that we may have about surveillance and access. When you think of access, what are you thinking about? Making it accessible for all. That way we could all benefit from the development, but also making sure who gets to build the AIs, right? And who gets to also regulate as we're seeing the opportunity. And then lastly, open source, as we mentioned, that is really creating the speed that we're seeing, but it's also creating opportunities to engage and make it more accessible for others, not just in the US, but across the world. And so how can we think about making it more transparent, inclusive, as well as more accountable? So with that said, we're going to jump right in, and we'll cover in two topics. One, with these set of experts, we're going to have the opportunity to have that inside look as well as external look. We will look at some of the policy and regulations as well. So Lori and Hoda, thank you so much for coming. First, we'd like to start off with just how did you get into these roles, and how are you also thinking about AI in your everyday life?
Is this on? Oh, okay. That's good. Well, first, I want to thank Judan and the whole team at HTTP for putting this entire conference together. I think it's critically important that we continue to convene to talk about these issues, how they impact communities, how the conversations then impact policy, and this sort of cyclical sort of cycle that all of us are in. And Lily and Lori, thank you for being part of this conversation as well. I guess my story is not very linear. I started first in civil society. I was at a civil rights organization, and we were tackling topics that really pertain to American Muslim communities here in the United States. And as you can imagine, the topic du jour for many, many years, continues to be till now, is the intersection of our communities and national security. And we realized that we were not dealing with necessarily the same sort of traditional tactics and conversations in the national security apparatus that had been discussed in previous decades, and that we needed to be more well-versed in the technology sort of industry and the ways in which tech policy was impacting our various communities through this very specific lens. And so I was privileged and honored enough to be able to start our tech policy portfolio working with different industry stakeholders on some of the issues that we were facing, whether it was privacy, whether it was content moderation, and whether it was even, this was like almost a decade ago, how AI was accelerating some of the issues that we were seeing and some of the policies that were coming out of certain administrations and the ways that it impacted our communities. And so from there, I jumped into the belly of the beast in the industry itself to see how I could be more of an advocate on the other side of the table.
Thank you so much. Lori.
Good morning. Oh, wonderful. Hi, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you to my moderator and panelists for including me in this discussion today. I think this is like the most important topic that we're thinking about at Meta today. For a little bit of background on myself, I've been at Meta now for almost 8 years, which is a lifetime in Meta time. Prior to this, I actually was on the think tank tour of DC. So I worked in several different think tanks across a number of public policy issues. And I think sort of similar to you, around 8 years ago, a lot was changing in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the policy conversations that we had had for many years, for the 10 years that I had been in D.C. prior to that, really felt like they were sort of becoming unmoored. It was, people were shifting. And so for me, as someone who cares deeply about a broad number of policy issues, but was not in any way actually a tech policy specialist at that point, it became very clear to me, similar to what you were saying, that if you care about any of these issues, for the next several years, and I think it's still true today, a lot of those issues are being adjudicated through the lens of tech, right? Whether it's things like antitrust policy or the First Amendment and content moderation and the thorny issues there, all of those issues were really coming to a head inside of tech. And so I similarly did a thing that I thought I would never do, and I jumped into a corporate job. So my role at Meta is actually working with that same community. I work with think tank scholars and experts across the political spectrum to make sure that we are working with them as we're designing our products, that we're bringing in that feedback, that we're hearing the things that concern them as we're thinking about what we're going to develop next, hearing needs from communities and how we can build towards serving those needs. And so it's been incredibly fulfilling.
I love that journey. Let's give some love. Come on, get the energy up. I think it's really important to hear for their journey because, as was shared earlier, right? There's no single path in it. If anything, the technology sector is all of us here. We're already in a lot of different ways, and it's really that multi-sector approach, multidiscipline approach that is really, really critical at this stage of development. So, with that said, let's jump into let's open the under the hood because it's we have these two important, as you heard from the different experiences that they've had, but especially as we start to think about and kind of demystify open source, right? A lot of the folks here, how many of you have been prompting, you're using your OpenAI or there may be other tools, Gemini, Llama, Claude? Okay. Some are, okay. I see some hands, but I would say how many of you are into the vibe coding? Have you heard that term? Okay, see some in the back. So there's a lot of what's been happening is a lot of fast development of a lot of, I would say probably decades of the technology that is now at your fingertips. If you go to GitHub, you create an account, you download, now you have an immense set of power that we never had it before. You're able to launch different types of businesses. But with those types of business and services, there's also a lot of issues with security and privacy and some of the trade-offs that we have to make. So with that said, I think with the open source, it's a double-edged sword, right? As we saw some of the news from DeepSeek, also combating some of the narrative dominance around the dominant narrative around build at all costs, build the fastest. So wondering how you're thinking about this and if you can help us educate and get a better pulse of what's currently happening in the open source development. What's the opportunity for more participatory models that we can engage to really make open source development safer, more transparent, more accessible?
I'm happy to start. So I guess I'll take a step back and I'll talk a little bit about our approach to open source. And the way that we see open source is that it's not really an on and off switch, right? Like that we just put something out there and we're going to be like, okay, this is open source and we're allowing access to the model as a whole. The way that we think about it, it's more of, if we're still using this analogy, that it's more of like a dimmer, right? And so there's like a spectrum. There are so many layers and levels, before a model comes out. We're talking about the model weights, which is, it can be billions, sometimes trillions, little pieces of the data coming together, the data sets that it's trained on, so many different levels. And so all of these things have their own sort of spectrum, the dimmer of how open or not, the company or, we want to make it. I think to your point, Lily, I think it's really important to think about some of the trade-offs, right? Let's talk about the positives because we're here in DC. We talk about policy. We want to know all sides of the issue before we make an informed decision. Some of the positives of open source obviously include innovation, right? It really encourages folks to play around with the technology, to build something, to create something from their own. And I think we've heard throughout the day, one of the themes that I took away from this conference is that when we think about challenges and opportunities from communities, who best to hear it from within the community, right? And so we want people to have access to these tools to be able to play around with, to build and create solutions for their communities. So innovation is key. And that's something obviously that our company, that Google is very proud of being part of, enhancing that space for people to play around with. The competition, like you said, we're living in an international, a global community. And so we can't just think about here within our borders in the United States. We're thinking about people globally and how, lives are impacting us here and here abroad. And so this sort of technology, as it develops for good, hopefully the idea is that it, spreads from within the community and then, can reach others. The trade-offs for open source, I think, are incredible, right? They're huge. We think about, even though, developers may build in guardrails from the beginning, whether it's on privacy, whether it's trying to mitigate biases and discrimination, or ensuring that like bad actors don't really have sort of the full suite of tools to be able to do the things that they're trying to do. Releasing open source models fully, we believe, could potentially be catastrophic, right? We can think about chemical, radioactive, nuclear, like sort of this suite of things that we see in sci-fi movies, but are a very real reality. And imagine if bad actors have access to all of these tools to be able to manipulate the codes, to be able to manipulate the models for their use. The idea is you can't really unring a bell once it's been rung. And so we do think very deeply and thoughtfully about things that we do release out into the world. And again, so it's not just an on or off sort of switch. We think about that spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful to have that example and the nuance that goes into it. Lori, tell us more, because you all have been in the news lately.
We have, yes. At Meta, we're proud of our commitment to open sourcing as many of our models as we can. I think similar to Google, we do a tremendous amount of work before we put anything out into the world as open source. We do all of the red teaming, the stress testing to make sure that it's going to stand up to malicious actors or people who may want to take the model and do something with it that we wouldn't want to be done. Similarly, we don't open source everything. It is a spectrum, and we think about the proper amount for each model and when is the right moment for every model to be open sourced. But I want to draw out a little bit on your comment around DeepSeek, because I do think that this is a really important, like, sort of entrant into the conversation. And one of the things, or at least one of the lessons that we took away from DeepSeek is actually the importance of American open source technology. When you think about how some of the models from China work, right, there's censorship built into it. There's a lot of sort of government control rather than what we have here in America and what sort of the internet and technology has been built upon traditionally, the Android ecosystem. All of those things are open source and have helped American technologies become like the backbone of how the world like interacts with data and information and each other. And China understands this, which is why China is incredibly committed to pumping up their AI companies, to providing the data, to helping them open source and putting them out there. And when you look at leaderboards, Chinese models are incredibly competitive with American companies. And so for us, this only like strengthens the call to open source, because if American companies aren't open sourcing models built on the values that we have here of openness and information exchange and truth, then you will end up in a world where other countries are building on Chinese models if they don't have the same level of sort of AI development inside of their own countries. So I do think it's really important that we like take that lesson away from the DeepSeek moment. We learn what they were able to do, why were they able to do it at the scale that they were with the resources that they claimed they were able to do it with. But then what does that say about how we're promoting American technologies abroad and in the rest of the world? Similarly, to sort of turn the page to a slightly different topic, one of the things you mentioned originally in the question was also privacy. Clearly, we think a tremendous amount about privacy as we're developing our models and making decisions around what we're open sourcing. We do open weights rather than sort of open sourcing the entirety of the thing, which we do think helps contribute to some privacy protections. But one of the interesting things about open source that I do want to make sure we're just like all on the same, sort of understanding level. This was all new for me like a year and a half ago. So pardon me if this is all sort of understood information at this point, but for us, one of the real benefits of open source is the additional privacy that it provides, because you can download it yourself, right? If you are a hospital, if you are a research center, if you're anyone dealing with sensitive information, then once you take the model from us, it is yours. Right? You can fine tune it with your own data, with your own information. And that works incredibly well if you're, again, in healthcare, if you're in legal services, if it's perhaps HR related, all of these places where you would have additional sensitivities around someone's information being used by an AI model. In that instance, you own it. You can run it locally if you want. You can run it through the cloud, right? There's all sorts of options for you to be able to ensure that you're maximizing your own data privacy preferences as you fine tune a model for your own usage. usage. So I do think that's a big actual benefit of open source technology, recognizing that obviously there are like very large privacy questions around AI in general.
That's where we get into the dimmer of different types of open source and how they're being applied. Actually, to pull the thread there, because I know one of the things that we hear about, especially where, garbage in, garbage out, but especially looking at the data and data privacy. So looking also at the biased data sets, right? And like making sure that that is being done properly at the beginning. So just wondering, for you all, when does this become like a key driving competitive advantage or business objective? Where especially when we look, especially for the Latina community, and we're very diverse in a lot of different ways. And so wondering what are some of the opportunities to have more either societal contextual data or more culturally relevant data be a differentiator. So then that way we could also apply it for more things or use it with more trust. So just wondering how you're all thinking about some of these more data sets and opportunities for it.
I think that one of the things that we are most proud of, and particularly our team, and my colleague Clarissa Ramon is here today as well, is that we, part of our remit is engaging civil society stakeholders, particularly from underrepresented, historically marginalized communities, and not just marginalized from sort of the traditional sectors, but also technology, and also, sort of the I guess historical data extraction from these communities. We are definitely trying to create that paradigm shift in collaborating with, building with communities. And so I see a number of our stakeholders here today, and we're really proud of ensuring and engaging our stakeholders to be part of these like trusted tester programs before we release some of our products out into the open. And so we have our folks be part of red teaming initiatives. They test the product before it goes out so that we ensure that the product, that the data set is culturally sensitive, it's culturally relevant. Just going through the list of ensuring that whatever tool we're trying to provide the public will actually be a tool used for good, and that it's relevant for a community, right? Because sometimes it's really cool to just create technology for technology's sake and like, wow, that was a really cool initiative and I loved it and it was so fun to play. But sometimes it's like equally as important for a company to develop the tools and products for communities because there is a need. And again, we as Google are not going to be parachuting into communities and saying, we think that you need this thing and so we're building it for you. It's these conversations, it's the relationships that we have with these stakeholders that inform us, again, both on the product, but also on the policy side. And so data privacy is incredibly important, and ensuring that, we're building these relationships. And I'll give a quick example. And, we have a partnership with Howard University on building out a data set in order to ensure that, like, how many people have like used some sort of like AI voice tool, and in whatever sort of like slang or vernacular you may use, it's just not picking it up. And so you're sort of code switching while trying to use a tool.
Even in Spanish.
Right? Or even in another, in any language, you have to switch in order for the product to work for you. And so we've developed this data set with Howard University, and we've actually given full control and ownership of the data set for Howard University to continue this project. And we're hoping to do it with other communities as well. But we are very proud of building that in on the front end and continuous through the life cycle of the ideation to the deployment phase.
Thank you. Would you like to? Okay, great. And then we'll move right into the elephant in the room, policy regulation.
I would say on our end, we think about it very similarly. I mean, the models that we're deploying inside our own services have to serve, 3.6 billion people on a daily or monthly basis. Our models are deployed everywhere, and we want Llama in the places where it's available for download to be something that's going to be culturally relevant. So we do lots of engagement here in the US as well as around the world to understand the ways in which it might be falling short, in which it's not understanding particular values, so that it can provide provide the most sort of culturally relevant response in different jurisdictions. I will also add, again, just to maybe be a little bit of a broken record, but the title of the panel is about open source. And so to me, this is one of the main benefits, though, also of open source is like we put out Llama so that people can use it. We learn from the ways in which people are using it. And when it's open source, we're able to see the problems more quickly, right? A developer finds something and says, this isn't working. Is it a problem with our data sets? Is it a problem in something else? And getting to have those learnings go back and forth, not just between us and civil society, but companies and the developer community who are trying to build for different use cases in different places, provides like very strong learnings about what we can be doing better and how we can improve the models, but then also provides the flexibility for those end-use developers to customize things for their own particular use case, right? We have people building for, maternal health care in Kenya, right? It's a important and very, it's like an important market that someone is stepping into to serve with an LLM based on Llama, right? But that requires an immense cultural understanding that this developer has, and we do not. And this is the purpose of providing Llama out there so that different developers can use it and find things that meet the needs of their own communities. So we get that feedback loop, but then also they can take things and customize them for themselves.
Thank you so much. I think thinking about the global perspective and use cases continues to be really critical as open source is borderless. And now going into the innovation and regulation, or maybe lack thereof of regulation. But I think one of the topics, we're right here in DC. Y'all are literally driving a lot of this change, and just wondering how you're thinking about the role, but also what would you like to see the evolution of the role of us as stakeholders, as developers, as you were mentioning. A lot of the times the startups aren't even really engaged in the process. Now they're starting to be, but how can we also increase it? So just curious as how you all are thinking about the role of your companies, other tech companies, the folks who are here as policymakers and community. What would you like to see more of, especially in the current environment that we're in, where at the federal level, what's happening, but we're seeing a lot of different issues at the state level as well. So wondering how you're thinking about the approach in this moment towards how can you balance innovation and regulation, and where can we place those safeguards?
I think you're using an incredibly important word, which is balance, right? And that's the balance of innovation and regulation. The way that we think about regulation at Google, first of all, AI is massive, right? And it's rapidly changing almost every single day. And so it's too big to not even regulate. I do think, and again, this is just pulling on a theme that I've heard from the panels throughout the day, which is it needs to be a whole of society approach. I think AI is so embedded in each and every one of our lives, in every almost facet of our lives every single day, that we need to have, people, communities, industry, and government all together sort of figuring this out. And not just for innovation's sake for industry, and not just for regulation for policymakers' sake, but really, like, how does this distill down to and impact the small business owner? When we're talking about sort of this like patchwork of privacy laws that we have in the United States versus like one federal law, that impacts how a small business owner is able to operate across the United States. So we're thinking the same way, when it comes to AI. The sort of implications that it has on communities is really important, because it's not just like this debate or this conversation that we're having at a high level, or that we're just having in Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley. This is something that really impacts Americans every single day. And so, we're thinking about regulation as a whole of society approach. Again, I go back to why it's so critically important to be able to build relationships with stakeholders, to be able to understand and think about the various sides that policy will really impact them, including researchers and academics as well. Going back to your point and why it's so important to think about the sort of nuances of open source and innovation and regulation, because it all fits under the same bucket. So I would just say that, like, for us, it is a whole of society approach. We're thinking about the balance. We also want to ensure that there's responsibility. that we have built into any sort of framework. We're proud of, being the first company to release our AI principles back in 2017. And we really think about building trust with our users. And that's first and foremost for us. And so seeing any sort of policy or regulation, it needs, like the foundation is its trust, its fairness, and its responsibility built into these products.
I would agree with all of that. I mean, obviously, we too are thinking about it from a sort of all of society perspective, and I think that's is one of the more interesting features of AI. But going back to my sort of initial opening statement, now if I would have told you, 8 years ago before I came to Meta that it was everything seemed to be adjudicated through the tech industry, now many things just all seem to be adjudicated through AI. And so I will get a little specific in some of the trends that I think that we've seen. You pointed out the state regulatory landscape, and just this year alone, there were over 1,000 proposed bills at the state level around AI. It's incredibly difficult to process and actually figure out what would the real implications of this legislation be when you have that massive of something that you're facing, even at a company like Meta, let alone if you were a smaller company that was deploying AI and you needed to figure out how you were going to deal with this legislative framework that could, really spring up at the state level. So we're thinking a lot about that, what is the proper level for every regulation? But additionally, what are the regulatory and legislative tools that already exist? So many of the ways that AI is slotting into our economy are already into industries that are particularly regulated, right? So what does it mean to think about AI in a healthcare context? What are the existing healthcare regulations that would apply to each individual type of AI deployment? Are they ready to go for that, AI to enter that space? Does there need to be some tweaking and updating? That, those I think are the questions that we need to think about rather than sort of we should regulate AI, right? Because it's actually those individual use cases that matter. And then I would say, finally, the last trend, again, bringing it back to the open source that I think is particularly worrisome from our perspective, is when you are thinking about regulation and legislation, there's been some, I think, ill-conceived legislation that doesn't really, into what I was saying earlier, think about where in the AI deployment pipeline to apportion that risk, right? We as a model developer certainly have responsibilities. We have responsibilities to make sure that we're keeping the data safe, that we're red teaming appropriately, that we're not releasing something into the world that is just, immediately going to cause something bad to happen or, has the risk of doing that. However, if we have fulfilled on all of those things and then someone were to take it and not maliciously or maliciously, but, say not maliciously for this purpose, do something that then violated a particular consumer protection law through their own fine tuning and deployment of AI in their own services, where does that responsibility lie? I think is an important question, because the last thing I think we want to do is to accidentally stem open source development, which stands to bring AI into, American industry, into small businesses, into communities in so many helpful ways by accidentally sort of apportioning liability at the wrong part of the pipeline. So I think that's a really important sort of first principle for policymakers to keep in mind.
Yeah, I want to underline that part, that specifically the nuances we're seeing, the progression, right, as how we all as society are also just getting smarter on the different applications of AI. Just in California, for the folks that are interested, go to caperfoundation.org. We did a mapping of over 50 plus AI bills just in California. And of those, we did deeper dives in 23 that look at everything from AI education to surveillance and algorithmic price fixing to healthcare data, your geolocation and how it could also be misused or not if it's in the wrong hands with the wrong actors. And so all that to say that I think this is the eye of the storm. It's really right now for the next few years, diving into more of the sector specific, more nuanced use cases. And this is my call out to you all, because this is where we need you all to be engaged as the representatives of our communities, but for yourself as well, because we need more of these types of stories and engagement to be a public, private, and philanthropy and community. Everyone needs to be involved, because I think it's driving a lot of we need to be able to answer these questions together. And right now, most of the information, whether we like it or not, the big tech companies are driving. But I think there's an opportunity, especially as we look for the state level opportunities as well as city level how many of you are here are aware that you could do city level ordinances and protections? So Oakland, San Francisco were one of the first that pulled that out of facial recognition being used in public spaces. Anyone know? Okay. Well, think about those. Yeah, there we go. We see some hands in the back. I think it's going to be very interesting. So with that said, we're getting ready to close. So my last question is going to be for you all. So much that we covered already. I hope you all were taking notes. It's going to be, what is the key insight that you want, especially this community, to leave, making sure they understand, engage, or as the field is moving so rapidly, right? Where can we also get resources to continue the engagement, the knowledge building?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I would say familiarize yourselves with the technology. Play with all of the available AI tools that are out there, because you're all, I'm assuming, policy folks here in Washington, D.C., and you're engaging your members of Congress, your advocates for your communities. You are the best person to be able to advocate for this type of technology, for innovation, for regulation with your member of Congress. I think there are members that, again, there's a sliding scale when it comes to the members of Congress who are equally sort of fluent with technology. And I think also they're looking for their constituents to go into their offices and help them understand some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. And this is how we all, sort of end up building together and working together. So please play around with the technology, familiarize yourselves with it. And then the second half of the question.
Where can folks see?
Okay, so this is just top of mind because it just happened, but Google just had their I/O, which is our developer conference, just a few weeks ago in Mountain View. And if you Google I/O 2025, you'll see some of the latest and greatest in terms of technology that you can familiarize yourselves with, but really sort of be able to adopt in your everyday lives. I mean, I was hearing from some of our stakeholders who are using Notebook LM, which is one of our tools, to be able to write advocacy and talking points, but be able to translate it into their into the opposing sort of political ideology, right? So that it's written in a way that is conversant and it's framed in a way that sort of folks, when they're on the Hill, they can talk to any office. They're not just sort of regulated to one side of the aisle. And so there are really, really creative use cases of people who are using this type of technology. There's we just released our VO3 technology, which is text to video. And now there are some organizations that are using this technology to be able to put together advocacy and calls to action videos, right? Not sort of the traditional sign up by just filling out your information on this link and then share with your friends, but it's engaging and it's interactive and it's getting people really excited to be part of a policy issue. So, I'm not asking for everyone to leave today as being hurrah, I'm a tech optimist. I think we also need to think critically about the challenges that it poses. But I think first and foremost, we all should be educated by really just playing with the technology.
I would add on to that, in addition to educating yourself simply around how the technology works, which I know even I today, as a person who works at Meta, feels like I'm learning something every day from the technologists that we work with, and how they're thinking through building. But in addition to that, I would say to familiarize yourself with the use cases, with how it's actually, I think. I don't know if we quite understand the extent to which people already are taking these tools and taking them into communities and building solutions for actual everyday people, right? And as another example, there's a company that's developing off of Llama called Solotech that's developed a multilingual AI that you can download, run while it's offline, and they're deploying it in rural communities across the country that don't have strong connectivity so that kids can learn, so that you can interact with it in your daily life if you aren't necessarily able to Google something in any given moment. And those types of use cases to me are so inspiring and help me even recognizing that the policy challenges that lie ahead really do help center me on the ways that we should be building these technologies and what the future can look like, right? Like I have 4 kids, they go from 18 to 4, and I am so cognizant that even the world that the 18-year-old is entering is completely different than the world I entered. And the world that the 4-year-old will enter is going to be completely different from the one that the 18-year-old is entering. And that's a lot of change. And so I think beyond just learning how the tools work for yourselves, like really understanding what solutions are coming out of them so that we can make carefully informed decisions about where regulation should be and where regulation might accidentally stymie development that we desperately need in this country. And the last thing I would add is I'm also particularly excited. We just given you, like lots of potential homework of like learn all of this about AI and learn all of this about the use cases. But in closing, I would say I find myself very excited and inspired about where this technology will go next, and not in terms of, I'm on my phone and I'm interacting, or I'm creating this thing on my laptop and interacting with an AI. But when we think like at Meta, we're very committed to our wearables line. I don't know if any of you have tried the Ray-Bans. If you haven't, we'd love to get them on your heads so that you can see how cool it is to have the AI-powered glasses. Google also has recently announced their own AI-powered glasses. And when I think about we already have partnerships with, accessibility groups like Be My Eyes that helps the low vision community navigate the world through Ray-Ban glasses. Those types of technologies were unimaginable not that long ago. And that's only the tip of the iceberg of what these things are going to allow. And so I just find be educated for today, but also be thinking about what are the challenges of tomorrow so that we can actively answer those questions as the technologies continue to evolve and, provide access to more people.
Thank you so much. I think that's a lot of homework for you all. I would say in closing thoughts, remember AI is not magic. AI has physical components, land, servers, water, energy. So these are going to be huge areas. So we have to think about, as you were saying, the critical thinking, the critical opportunities right now to shape some of these policies are super critical, especially for the Latino community. Right now, most of the data centers are being built in our communities, over-indexing in Black and Brown communities. So take a look at that, because there's a lot of opportunity for policy to help shape it and inform it, as well as all the way through what we just talked about today, which is the power of open source at your fingertips. These different types of use cases, if they're done right, if they're done with the intention of making sure that our data privacy is being protected, that some of these bad actors use cases are also being considered, and that we're also protecting our future, right? Because to the question is, to what end? So I think it's really important to continue that conversation. Thank you, Judan and the HTTP team, for helping us have this really informational conversation. And then thank you so much for your insights and your experience. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and close out. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your panelists.